Happy Friday, hockey fans. Welcome into an all-new edition of Daily Faceoff Live, coming to you live on the Daily Faceoff YouTube, where, as always, we're looking for your questions for later on in the show. And as always, the show is brought to you by Bet365. Download the Bet365 app and use the promo code NATION to get in on a huge range of markets. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. As I bring in my boy, Frank Seravalli. How you doing on this beautiful Friday?
Can you believe they let us get to Friday again? Let's go.
It snowed about, oh boy, almost a foot. Probably, I'm exaggerating, maybe 8 inches yesterday in Edmonton. So after we had Murat Atesh on earlier in the week, I feel like he cursed me with the Winnipeg weather.
Yeah, well, everyone's been golfing where I'm at. So, yeah, I mean, everything's heating up in a big way, quite literally, including some playoff chases.
Playoff chases. Bingo. Great transition, Frank. We're going to be joined by Carter Hutton in a little bit for today's big segment. But to kick off the show, let's start with a result from last night. And no team maybe got a bigger win than the Ottawa Senators. They are streaking right now. Not only have they won 4 in a row, they have points in 6 straight, Frank. And what's encouraging to me about this is they're winning in all sorts of ways. There's 2-1 games, 6-3 games like last night. Their offense can carry them. Linus Ullmark can carry them. This team, like, I'll ask you, I guess, to start, what % chance you give them of getting into the playoffs? But I almost want to have a bigger conversation of, like, this team might be a threat to win a round.
85% chance to make the playoffs. They're in. It's not just that they've won a few games in a row. It's also who they've beaten along the way. They cool off the Boston Bruins, who were kind of sort of nipping at the heels of this playoff chase. And then beyond that, big win over Detroit, for instance. Like, it's not just winning, it's winning at the right moment in time. And the Sens have captured that in a big way. And I like how you mentioned the versatility, the different ways that they've won. They've got something cooking. I think Dylan Cousins has added some new interesting life to that team. And they've got the goalie to back it up. Like, they can enter the chat and in round 1 be a live dog. Depends on the matchup, of course, but if you were to tell me Leafs Sens round 1, you don't think they could go toe-to-toe with the Leafs in a battle of Ontario? I think that they could make Toronto sweat with all the demons that are in and under their bed and in their closet. I mean, think back to the North Division playoffs. Like, who in their right mind saw the Toronto Maple Leafs losing to the Montreal Canadiens of all teams at that moment in time? The Sens are way better than that North Division matchup. And beyond that, we could also get a Tkachuk brothers matchup in round 1. That's kind of what it's also shaping up like. I mean, that would be tough, but they're a live dog.
Yeah, they absolutely are. Linus Ullmark showing he is, again, hasn't lost anything since coming over from Boston. He's looking like a Vezina caliber goalie. That save he made yesterday with the arm reaching back was just absolutely bananas as well. And I mean, if you want a nice little table setter for your weekend, Hockey Night in Canada, Ottawa, Toronto tomorrow night. That is going to be absolutely spicy between those two sides. And one more thing on the Sens, Frank, some of the games they have down the stretch, only 17 left on schedule, but they get the Sabres twice. They get the Hawks, they get the Flyers, they get the Penguins. Like, they already control their own destiny, but it's almost at the point where it's like, hey, if you can just take care of those 5 games against, call them weaker opponents, then you're going to be at 85 points just by winning those 5 games.
Yeah, and guess what? Those teams in those moments in time, particularly in April, are going to be trying out undrafted free agents, draft picks that are called up to the NHL. Everyone's trying to get a taste of the NHL heading into the summer. Might set up really nicely for them.
Yeah, really, really good. And again, keeping wild card 1, you avoid the potential President's Trophy winning Washington Capitals as well. Man, I'm such a fan of chaos, Frank. And like, again, I'm not a Leafs fan nor a Leafs hater. I am in the middle on the Toronto Maple Leafs, but the chaos of them losing to Ottawa potentially in round 1 would just be unbelievable.
Yeah, but which is the more chaotic matchup, the Tkachuk brothers or Leafs Sens?
Yeah, I mean, hey, even that, I guess, is a good point, because Florida losing in round 1 after doing all the moves they did, coming off a Stanley Cup, Like, it would be a crazy upset either way. And maybe I'm getting a little bit too far ahead of myself with all this, but like, just get me to playoff hockey here. I want to see
I
the
don't
Sens team in the playoffs.
I don't care who wins or loses. Just saying that those two squaring off in a playoff round would be unreal. And I did have a quick update on Matthew Tkachuk last night. The Panthers haven't actually closed the door to him returning in the regular season. I know that sounds funny to say because they went out and spent all of that LTIR money, but with Aaron Ekblad, his 20-game suspension, since he's suspended without pay, his money doesn't count against the cap for this period in time. And so if they got themselves into a spot where Matthew Tkachuk is somehow ready, the timeline still isn't clear yet, they might be able to move enough money around to get him back into the lineup for the final couple regular season games to then gear him up and have him hit the ground running for round one. So keep an eye on that. Still to be determined, but it's not dead yet.
Yeah. Tommy poking some fun at us. Too far ahead, kind of like the Ovi only needs 3 more hat tricks hype, which yeah, I mean, Ovi's gone a little bit cold here. Need him to start scoring. Sticking with the games last night, Frank, listen, if people maybe tuned out for the third period of Hawks Sharks, I wouldn't blame them for that. But there was something that, yeah. There was something that came out of it halfway through the third. Connor Bedard gets an abuse of officials penalty. So he gets the 10-minute misconduct. And we had someone in the chat here. It was Derek who said, do you know why Bedard got the 10 minutes? It was not clear on the broadcast. And this conversation here was the one that, again, the ref then went over and gave him the penalty, and you see Bedard looking all sorts of confused. I guess, again, it's not clear. You can't really read lips here from Bedard. I wonder if that was the ref coming over being like, I'm giving you a penalty for this, or if that's where it was said, whatever caused the 10-minute penalty.
It sounds like it was said on the ice, actually, before he got back to the bench. So whatever we saw on camera looked kind of benign. Nonetheless, Chris Rooney then was in conversation, the referee, with Nick Foligno, and he appeared to go like this. And it wasn't saying 2-minute penalty, of course. He appeared to be saying that's the second time tonight that he had something said to him that obviously crossed the line. So I think the big takeaway is that Connor Bedard needs to be more careful. He needs to be smarter, and he needs to keep his emotions in check better. This is not the first time he's been captured yapping. And if you're trying to get more calls, constantly chirping isn't necessarily going to be the way to do it. So, in that moment, 10 minutes and 50 seconds left in a 1-goal game against the team that's right next to you in the standings in the lottery chase, why, be smarter? And you're going head to head too against the guy that was picked number 1 overall the year after you. I'm sure there's a lot of extra emotion in there, but you've got to find a way to harness that better and show some growth and maturity, because that part really stands out. I was thinking after the 10-minute misconduct expired, he finally got out of the box. The Sharks had scored an empty netter, and so he didn't see the ice again, but probably shouldn't have. Puts the team in a tough spot trying to chase in a 1-goal game, spending 10 minutes in the box because of your mouth.
Yeah. And I mean, hey, this is not a new thing, like a young star player having to learn this lesson. Remember Sidney Crosby's reputation as a whiner. It took him 7-8 years to get rid of that. I remember Connor McDavid getting a 10-minute misconduct during a shootout in his second or third season in the league when he skated past a ref after scoring a shootout goal and said, check upstairs, because he was mad about a review earlier in the game. Like, unnecessary stuff. But these young stars, I think, sometimes have to learn that lesson. And for Bedard, I'm not going to sit here and call him a whiner or anything, but I think you're right, Frank. You got to kind of keep it in check a little bit better. And it's a lesson these guys got to learn.
Not only that, but, it takes a long time to get rid of that reputation once you have it. So, I mean, you mentioned that with Crosby, and that was certainly something that was talked about a lot. But now look at him. It doesn't seem like he ever says a word. And there is something to the idea of kind of having to earn your stripes in the NHL. No referee likes getting shown up by any player, let alone a 19-year-old kid. And Chris Rooney's been at this a long time. This is a Stanley Cup final level official. I'm sure that what was said really did cross the threshold to then warrant the 10 minutes.
Yeah. Let's continue along, Frank. We just talked about sort of the bubble in the playoffs in the East, but let's talk about some contenders here who, are maybe more along the lines of locks to make the playoffs, but maybe still have something to prove here in their final 16, 17 games of the regular season. So I'll start in the East, Frank, where the team I had kind of circled was the Carolina Hurricanes. Like, I look at everyone else who's a legitimate cup contender, and I go, hey, those teams in the Atlantic, honestly, whatever they do down the stretch, it's going to be a dogfight no matter what in the playoffs. I look at Carolina and go, they're the one team, they've won 5 in a row now. They can change my opinion of them in this final month. Do you agree? Did you have another team?
I have another team. I'm going to go with the Devils, the team that's their likely first round matchup. I mean, we know that Jack Hughes is out. We know that Dougie Hamilton's done for the regular season. But when I look at that team, there was so much more hope and promise. And the Devils at one point earlier in the season, people were looking at as a legitimate Stanley Cup threat. They have a chance to make some noise based on purely just what you were talking about, that the Carolina Hurricanes, especially after this Mikko Rantanen trade, they're a team that can be beat in round one. Can you find a way to play better hockey down the stretch, defend better? The funny thing about the Devils season is their goaltending has been so much better than it has been at any other point during Tom Fitzgerald's tenure. And yet now all of a sudden they're missing the secondary scoring punch. They're missing some of the experience that they had on the back end earlier in the year. So they've got an opportunity here to play better and put themselves in a position to make some noise and create an upset that could then provide them some momentum heading into the summer.
Yeah, and I think that's an important one too, the momentum into the summer. Out west, Frank, I went with a pretty similar line of thinking. I looked at the Central and I'm like, okay, if Winnipeg holds on to the top spot, I'm going to view them as a legitimate threat to go deep simply because of the presence of Hellebuck. Dallas, Colorado, whether they win 3 in a row going into the playoffs or lose 3 in a row, that series is going to be an absolute coin flip. So I picked a team in the Pacific, and honestly, I'm not sure which one, but I really do think all 3 of them have something to prove down the stretch here.
I think the Kings have something to prove for sure. They're a team that also had a disappointing and/or deflating trade deadline, didn't do much of anything. And now they've also played themselves into a position here, more so by virtue of the way that the Oilers have played than the way they have played, that they've passed Edmonton. Can you get home ice in round one? Can you position yourself in a downturn for the Oilers to, in the 4th year potentially that you're going head to head, can you knock them off in round one? I think the Wild also have something to prove. Can they be a team with more dimensions than, oh, this is the Minnesota Wild without Kirill Kaprizov? The next game that he misses will be his 30th game of the season. He's played 3 games since Christmas, just 1 game. He's played no game since January 26th. There's no clear timeline on his return yet. Despite missing 30 games this season, Kirill Kaprizov still leads the Minnesota Wild in goals. It's a mind-blowing number. And yes, it hurts having Joel Eriksson Ek out, and they've had a tough run of injuries, but the Wild need to add other layers to their game to find that they can be a team that can compete.
Yeah, there's a lot of ifs on that Minnesota team for me. Can the blue line stay healthy? Will you get the Philip Gustafson you got for the first 2 months of the season? And will Kirill Kaprizov even be in your lineup? And what's interesting about that, Frank, there was a point earlier this season, Kirill Kaprizov was the betting odds favorite to win the Hart Trophy, and injuries have taken him out of that race. So a nice transition to the MVP race this year. Yesterday, we talked Norris, so let's keep the awards talk rolling along here. Leon Draisaitl, it is Draisaitl versus the field right now. He's a minus 150 favorite, and I do think that's deserved. Not to be the Edmonton guy, but as someone who watches that team on a nightly basis, it is very, very clear who the only driver is on that team. And he is responsible for, or he's been in on 46.8% of their goals so far this season. And out of the 209 goals that they've scored as a team, he's been on the ice for 119 of them. That's 57%, a very high number. I think Draisaitl is the deserved favorite. Do you agree?
I don't. I can't believe that looking at this board, you've got someone that's minus money when Nathan MacKinnon has played as well as he has consistently from start to finish. I mean, you can talk about, like we can go back to the same old debate, but Rantanen's gone now. And what about the stretch of 20 games to start the year in which it was basically only MacKinnon, Rantanen, and Makar? It's great to have someone like Makar on the back end. And yes, I know Draisaitl's lapping the field in goals, but I mean, At what point has McKinnon not played like a Hart Trophy favorite this year? At what point has there been a huge sag in the Colorado Avalanche season? It's been like a roller coaster for the Oilers. And I know Draisaitl is right in the middle of all of it, and the one guy that there's no fault to pin on, but they didn't start well. Then they were excellent for a while. Now they're back down again. And it's like, this team's all over the place. And he's the one guy showing up on a night-to-night basis, and you can make the argument, hey, that's exactly what a Hart Trophy winner does. But to go from minus 150 to plus 550, that's way too big of a gap, in my opinion. And I think if I were to be voting today, I'd probably have McKinnon at the top of my ballot.
I do agree that it's Draisaitl and McKinnon at 1 and 2. I always struggle with the goaltending side of it. You see Connor Hellebuyck at number 2 on the board. And listen, I don't want Carter Hutton to abandon his appearance in a minute here, because I'm saying I wouldn't have Hellebuyck on my ballot, but I think I would have Zach Werenski at 3, Frank.
I was to answer the question in our title of the show, how many true MVP candidates are there? I think the answer is 4. Wow. I think it's Draisaitl, McKinnon, Hellebuyck, and Werenski. And then after that, I think you have to squint real hard. Jack Eichel just set a new franchise record for the Vegas Golden Knights in points. He's been excellent. But I think when you consider the level that Eichel's at and the level that those other guys are at, there's probably a pretty clear gap. So Eichel would probably be the 5th guy on my ballot. But yeah, I think Werenski certainly deserves consideration. And Hellebuyck, we've talked about his numbers. We've talked about how it's not even a conversation for the Vezina, but Hellebuyck also has more wins in net than a team like the Oilers do all season long, just himself. So, I mean, he certainly is going to be deserving of that consideration. I think when it comes to adding the goalie into the mix, you have to really transcend the position. And I think going back to the Carey Price conversation from 10 years ago, Carey Price did that. Connor Hellebuyck has done that. He's going to get Hart votes.
Let's get to the goalie talk for today. Our big segment is brought to you by Tim Hortons Canada. Your favorite contest is back. Roll Up to Win is back at Tim Hortons, and that means you could win millions of amazing prizes with just the swipe of a thumb. Imagine turning your routine Tim's run into an unforgettable vacation with Sell-Off Vacations, $1,000 Rakuten cash prize, or an all-new, all-electric 2025 Volkswagen ID Buzz. You only have until March 23rd, so download the Tim's app today. Rules apply. Canada only. No purchase necessary. Visit the Tim's app for details. Always a pleasure to welcome former NHL netminder Carter Hutton to the show, and I'm going to flip up the order here, Hutz. Let's start with that MVP talk. Hellebuyck is a lock for the Vezina, but what do you make about him being an MVP candidate? Are you one of those guys that thinks goalies should get more love in that race?
You know, I guess maybe you can make the argument for Hellebuyck because he plays so many minutes and he plays a lot of game and he is the most important player for Winnipeg Jets. But at the same time, it's hard when you're a guy that doesn't have an impact on every single game, right? You think about Draisaitl and McKinnon playing every single night. There's no nights off. So I am biased because he is a goalie and he's the best goalie in the world. But I still think it's always going to, bode toward the player because you're playing every single night. And for Hellebuyck, he goes, I think this whole Jets team is only going to go as far as he can take them come playoff time. I think we saw that at the deadline, what they added a little bit of perimeter to their team because I feel like at this point he's going to have to be the difference maker for them.
So let me just quickly wrap up the awards side of our segment here. If Hellebuyck is your lock for number 1 in the Vezina, I mean, this is a guy who could win the goaltending Triple Crown. Who else do you have on your ballot?
I think right now it's got to be Logan Thompson, what he's done this year. He's 28-4. He's been great. His numbers have dropped off a little bit as we move forward here at 916. But like looking at 28-4 is unbelievable. I think the fact of the matter is I don't really think anyone pegged Washington to be as good as they've been this year. And he's been a big difference maker in that team. I think leaving Vegas, everyone was a little bit unsure of where he was going to go and how it would go. And he's been great and fun to watch. And then the other guy, it's Andrei Vasilevskiy. I think he's put himself back on the map here. He's got 30 wins now, and he's been an absolute workhorse for the Tampa Bay Lightning with a .920 save percentage. And for me, Tampa Bay is that scary team again now. We look at the loaded Atlantic. Nobody wants to have to go down to Florida. We saw the matchup last night between Florida and Toronto, a big loss for Toronto. Now looking like you might have to go back and play Tampa Bay in the first round with Andrei Vasilevskiy there and what they've done at the trade deadline to load up. That is a scary team in the East.
Yeah. Andrei Vasilevsky's back to providing teams some nightmare fuel, which is certainly scary when you head into the postseason. Let's talk news of the day, Huts. Adin Hill signs a 6-year extension with the Vegas Golden Knights at $6.25 million. You can see the table that was kind of set by Kevin Lankinen And then Karel Vejmelka, they had 4-year, 5-year deals in the 4.5, 4.75 range. Adin Hill's got the cup. He was north of them in AAV to begin with. Do you like this signing, and how do you think it fits in the marketplace?
I think it's pretty good. Honestly, I think it's pretty good for Vegas, right? I think you're kind of hedging your bet here if you're Vegas, because if he goes on another playoff run and wins another cup, or they go really deep in the playoffs, I think the price only goes up. And for a guy like Adin Hill, who wasn't really marked to be a stud, he's kind of come into his own, and I think he's fallen into a good place in Vegas, right? Where they defend very well. He's a career 906 save percentage, or this year, sorry, 909 in over like 175 games now, which is like really good numbers. But again, I think it's skewed a bit because Vegas is so good defensively. We look at that playoff run, his numbers in the playoff have been very good, but I think this is a hedge your bet here. And I think time will tell, if there's some shrapnel from all these signings that Vegas has had over the last few years. In year 3-4 of this deal, can he still put up those good numbers? So
just off the top of your head, if you were to take the 32 starting goalies, so to speak, in the NHL, where would Hill be in the second 10?
Yeah. Second 10 for sure. I think I could put 10 guys ahead of him right now. Just based on his skill set, right? Frank, he's a big body, takes up a lot of space. He doesn't really wow you. I think if you put Adin Hill in the wrong situation, a team that isn't very defensive and they give up a lot more open ice chances, I think it would be a little more chaotic for him just because his lack of lateral movement. But he is a good goalie. He has the mental awareness, obviously, and capability to win in the playoffs. So I think there's value there. He's like the perfect fit for me. And that's why I was surprised we didn't really see a taste of him in Four Nations, because obviously Binnington went with it, but he would have been protected, right? We saw how well they defended. But that being said, it'll be interesting to see how this deal plays out.
Yeah, and still a good deal for Hill, 37 million bucks. And not only that, but you look at the way the pay scale has changed for some of these sort of mid-tier goalies, Joey Decord, I mentioned some of the others. Like, it's a good time to be a mid-tier goalie with the cap going up. Before, we were seeing only the top level guys getting paid, and the guys toward the mid were getting squeezed into the lower tier. And that's been tough for goalies for a few years now, but it seems like that's back. So speaking of that, let's talk about what the market looks like this summer. Is there a UFA a pending UFA as we get closer to July 1 that stands out for you that you would be targeting if you were a team looking for help in net?
It's going to be tricky, right? Because a lot of these guys don't have good numbers. Everybody's sub 900, and a few guys have made a lot of money. Jake Allen is on a really good contract. He signed early with Montreal, and Jake, being a friend of mine, he felt like he was pressured into it because he knew Montreal wasn't going to be good, so he wanted to take that money. I think he's going to have to take a pay cut. I think he still gets a deal. And the interesting one for me would be Ilya Samsonov and Dan Vladar. Those are the two guys that I still think have some upside, and you could probably squeeze them out. I wouldn't be surprised if Samsonov tries to get a deal done earlier with Vegas. Now that Adin Hill is in place, you can kind of get him on a 2 or 3 year deal at like lower money because his numbers aren't great. So he would be the guy that I think, is sought after for Vegas to stay, and then they have their two guys moving forward. And then the other guy is obviously Georgiev. I feel like his game has been a little bit up and down. He's played well as of late for the San Jose Sharks. I think he's going to have to take a pay cut to get somewhere. So this is a weaker market, I would say, comparatively, especially the way that most guys' numbers are.
So then let me ask you about potential bounce back candidates. I know a couple of months ago we had the conversation about both Jari and Grubauer maybe being two guys who could get bought out this summer. Jari's come back from the minors and played 3 really good games for the Penguins. Do you think, with the UFA class being what it is, if Jari were to get bought out, where does he slot amongst those guys?
Yeah, I think he'd be right up there if he was bought out, especially a guy that's played. He's just under 300 games played in his career. He's only 29 years old. He's young. He still has a lot of miles on his tires. And for me, the fact of the matter, he's got a 910 save percentage over his career, which is great. But I feel like in Pittsburgh, it's been those lack of the numbers and the way they've come down. But again, in the NHL, if you don't defend well, your goalie has to be superb to really make up for that. Again, another goalie that, Frank, I would probably slot in the lower half of the starters to start the year. But again, I think for me, the biggest problem with Tristan Jarry is like the eye test. His game just doesn't look as groomed as most goalies, right? His post integration, the way he moves. But that being said, he is a puck stopper. And again, I think if you could get him on a defensive team with a good like AAV on his contract, there's a lot of value there.
Yeah, and someone will probably take a peek at a Vitek Vanacek or someone that's also in the UFA category. I think just a reminder that in the goalie market and goalie world, what's down isn't necessarily down forever. I mean, look at Mackenzie Blackwood and how he resuscitated his career, turns it all of a sudden into a $25+ million contract with the Colorado Avalanche. And you go, this is a guy that 18 months ago was on the scrap heap.
It's so true, Frank. And again, I always felt like this when I was in free agency. It's like, it's better the devil you know, right? Like if you're a guy that has a decent rapport and you've been in the league, they'd rather give you a second chance than try to bring someone in. I felt like getting a seat at the table was the most important part. Once you were there, you really had to play real bad to blow it.
Former NHL goaltender Carter Hutton. You can find him on the Bet365 Starting Goalie Show on Daily Faceoff as well. Huts, thanks for popping on.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Move along to the YouTube chat, Frank, for hashtag askdfo. We got a couple that are both along the same line. So Fighting Amish was in and said, it's very suspect that Ekblad's money isn't counted towards the cap. Why is the suspended players team not punished? And then Tage fan said, is Ekblad's PED suspension the new LTIR loophole? Listen, it's not on the cap because Ekblad's not getting paid. Like, I don't think Aaron Ekblad put his hand up and was like, I will forego $1 million of salary so that Matt Tkachuk can play in 2 or 3 regular season games.
Yeah, no, they planned this out so that they could activate everyone. Like, come on. It's, you know, I understand the question because people are like, look, the Florida Panthers deliberately went out and spent the LTIR money. So if Matthew Tkachuk could have came back, for the bigger question should be if he could come back for the final 2 games, should they have really been able to go out and spend the LTIR money? So nonetheless, I don't think anyone's also doubting the severity of Matthew Tkachuk's groin injury. This is a significant tear that they're going to have to monitor very closely and make sure that he doesn't come back too early to put himself in a position where he's missing playoff games. So I still think a long shot. Just the amazing part is that the door hasn't been closed.
Yeah. All right. Daily bets for the day brought to you by Bet365, where every nail-biting overtime win is a barn burner. Every face-off, hat-trick, power play, shot on goal in between is suspenseful. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365, an official partner of the NHL. Download the Bet365 app. Use the promo code NATION. I got one straight play. It's the Carolina Hurricanes on the puck line against the Detroit Red Wings. I know the Red Wings bounced back into the win column, but they are below 500 on the road, and Carolina is one of the best home teams in the NHL. 26-8 straight up. They're red hot. Love them on the puck line. And Friday nights, goal scorer parlays. I always like taking big shots on these. Both Barrett Hayton and Arturi Lehkonen have scored 5 goals in their last 10 games. So call them 2 coin flips at plus 300 and plus 210, respectively. Both favorites in their matchups tonight as well. 11-1 are the odds on that two-legged. Juicy, Frank. It's juicy. All right, to wrap up the show, a little bit of garbage time and a headline that kind of caught fire yesterday, Frank. GM of the AHL's Utica Comets trades his own son for future considerations, but it might not be as harsh as the headline makes it sound.
Oh, man. People are all over this. I don't know why it became such a thing, but they're saying, look how, you know, he did his son dirty. He traded him for futures. Like, they didn't even get anything in return for him. I don't know the full ins and outs of the story. This was so overblown. And what I would say is I'm sure that he's not putting his son in a position to fail. That if anything, he's probably giving him an opportunity to continue his career somewhere else. And always good to have that help and leg up and someone looking out for you. There's no chance that he's getting the short end of the stick here when it comes to the deal.
Yeah, and that's kind of what made me laugh. Everyone's like, oh my God, can you believe it? Cutthroat hockey business. I'm like, no, this actually might be the opposite. This might be a dad being like, hey, my kid isn't playing, or he's on the third pair, or he sees what the market's like in the summer. It's like, hey, I'm going to do you a solid. Like, we don't need to be in the same organization. Move along. Anyways, Frank, before we go, want to let everybody know, new episode of Frankly Speaking dropping in about half an hour here on the Daily Faceoff YouTube, where your guest was yourself, Frank. You took questions from the people, deadline related stuff. Maybe give people a tease. What kind of questions did you answer?
I'm tired of hearing myself an entire 31 minutes of me just talking straight into a microphone. I don't find that appealing, but apparently people do, because they really liked the last Q&A that we did. Where I just take your questions. I solicited questions off of Twitter, and I answered everything from what kind of product I put in my hair to what didn't happen behind the scenes, some different trade talks that were going on. What's it like being an insider on trade deadline day? It kind of anything goes. No holds barred. So let's get after it. And I did.
Find Frankly Speaking wherever you get your podcast from. That is a wrap on another week of Daily Face-Off Live. Next week, Board of Governors or GM meetings?
GM meetings.
GM meetings are next week. So Frank will be giving us the goods from there, and we'll have you covered on the playoff races as well. Enjoy the hockey this weekend. Enjoy your weekend in general, and we'll see you again on Monday at noon Eastern. What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you're going to want to hit the subscribe button to not miss any of our content. From daily live shows with Frank Seravalli to analysis from former NHLers to exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the hockey world on Frankly Speaking. You're going to want to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with everything going on in the hockey world.